It started with the kind of sound that cuts through everything. A sharp smack that silenced the clinking of silverware, the soft hum of a jukebox, and the gentle chatter of a small town diner on a quiet Sunday morning. Heads turned. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Coffee cups trembled in shocked hands. At a corner booth sat an old man, wrinkled, shoulders bent with age, a veteran's cap pulled low over his thinning white hair. He had been smiling just moments earlier, chatting softly with the waitress who'd served him at this same diner for years. But now across from him stood a much younger man. Angry, aggressive, dangerous. His hand still hovered in the air from the slap he'd just delivered. That old man was 81 years old. His name was Jack Reynolds, a Korean War veteran. He had survived battles most people couldn't even imagine. He had lived through loss, through decades of life's storms. Yet now, in this peaceful diner he called a second home, he had been humiliated by a thug who thought nothing of striking someone 4 times his age. Gasps filled the room, but no one moved at first. The man who hit him was big-tattooed and oozing menace. He shouted, "You think your old stories mean something? You're nothing now. Nobody cares what you did 50 years ago." Jack didn't argue. He didn't shout back. His lips quivered, not from fear, but from the ache of something far deeper: respect lost, dignity stolen, the sting not of the hand, but of the world forgetting. And then the bell over the diner's door jingled. A gust of September air swept in as a tall, broad-shouldered man walked through the doorway. The leather jacket, the patches, the unmistakable winged skull insignia on the back, every person in that diner knew what it meant. He was part of the Hells Angels, and not just a member. He was Mark Reynolds, Jack's only son. Before we get to what happened next, you need to understand something. Jack wasn't just a veteran. He was a man who had raised his son with everything he had left after the war. Life hadn't been easy. His wife passed away when Mark was just a teenager, leaving Jack to raise him alone. Mark, restless and angry at the world, fell into trouble. He found his way into motorcycle clubs, into the Hells Angels, and onto the rough roads of rebellion. Many said he'd never come back from it. But deep down, despite the leather, the tattoos, the rough life, he carried one unshakable thing inside of him: respect for the man who had raised him. Jack had taught him one lesson that never left. Son, never forget where you came from, and never let anyone take your dignity. And now, as Mark stepped into that diner, he saw his father sitting with a red mark across his weathered cheek, the mark of disrespect. Mark froze for half a second, his eyes locking on his father. Then his gaze shifted to the thug who was still looming over Jack. The diner grew so quiet you could hear the old ceiling fan creak. The thug sneered. "What are you looking at, biker boy? You want some of this too?" But what he didn't realize was that Mark wasn't alone. Behind him, through the doorway, came the rumble of engines. One by one, leather-clad men walked in, bearded, scarred, their jackets all carrying the same blazing emblem. The Hells Angels had rolled in, and they weren't here for pancakes. The thug's smirk faltered. He had power when he was standing over an old man, but now he was outnumbered 10-1 by men who lived by a code he couldn't begin to understand. Mark stepped forward until he was face to face with him. "That's my father you just laid hands on," he growled. The thug's bravado cracked. His voice wavered. Hey, it was just a joke." Old man was running his mouth. Mark's fist clenched, but Jack's trembling voice spoke before his son could act. "Mark, don't." The old man's words carried more weight than any punch. Everyone turned to him. He sat straighter in his booth, the red welt on his cheek still fresh but his pride unbroken. "Son, violence got us here. It won't fix this. Let him leave. Let him see that respect comes from restraint, not fists." The entire diner held its breath. Mark's jaw tightened. His brothers shifted uneasily, waiting for his call. But slowly, painfully, he stepped back. "You heard him," Mark said, his voice low and steady. "Get out. And don't you ever walk into this diner again." The thug stumbled backward, bumping into chairs as he rushed out the door. His bravado had crumbled. He'd slapped an old man and thought he was strong. But in the end, it was the old man's dignity and the loyalty of a son that had broken him. The aftermath, the diner exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for an eternity. Waitresses hurried to refill Jack's coffee, their hands shaking. Customers murmured their respect, but Jack looked only at his son. For a long moment, the two men, so different in appearance, yet bound by blood and history, just stared at each other. "You didn't have to come in like that," Jack said softly. Mark sat across from him, his huge frame suddenly looking smaller. "I wasn't going to let anyone disrespect you, Dad. Not after everything you've been through." Jack's eyes watered, though he blinked it away. "Respect isn't about fear, son. It's about honor. I'm proud of you, not because you walked in with an army, but because you listened when I told you to stop." For the first time in years, Mark felt like the boy sitting at that diner counter decades earlier, sipping milkshakes with his father. The biker, the rebel, the hardened man. Underneath it all, he was still Jack's son. But life didn't magically get easier after that day. Respect wasn't something that came freely anymore, especially for veterans like Jack. Too many people saw them as relics, not heroes. Too many forgot the sacrifices made. Jack and Mark faced more than one challenge in the months that followed. Jack's health began to fail. His small pension wasn't enough to cover everything. There were times when he felt invisible, times when he wanted to give up. But Mark never let him. The same biker who once rebelled against the world became his father's shield. He rallied his brothers and organized fundraisers and even convinced the Hells Angels, known for their rough reputation, to host events honoring veterans. People started noticing. Stories spread, and slowly, Jack's dignity wasn't just restored. It was amplified. The resolution 1 year after that diner incident, the same town held a parade for veterans. Jack, now in a wheelchair, sat at the front. Mark stood behind him, leather jacket gleaming in the sunlight, hands resting proudly on his father's shoulders. As the crowd cheered, Jack looked up at his son and whispered, "See, Mark, respect doesn't fade. Sometimes it just needs to be reminded." Mark smiled, his rough exterior softening. "And no one's ever going to forget you, Dad. Not while I'm around." And that's the story, my friends. A story about an old man's dignity, a son's loyalty, and the truth that respect is something you earn, not something you can take with your fists. It reminds us all that kindness, honor, and loyalty outshine hate every single time. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own family, your own respect for the ones who came before you, then I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me about a moment when you stood up for someone you loved, or when someone stood up for you. And don't forget, subscribe to this channel. Be kind always, where we bring you real, raw, and powerful stories that remind us what truly matters. Because at the end of the day, kindness and respect are the legacy we leave behind.